Gray wolves were gone from this landscape.
14 wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park. From there, those 14 wolves basically saved the entire park's collapsing ecosystem.
For 70 years, Yellowstone looked alive. Its grasslands golden, its valleys teeming with elk. But beneath the beauty, the park was unraveling.
In 1926, park rangers shot Yellowstone's last wolf.
And trees never grew back. Rivers began to slip from their beds. Something vital had vanished. Then, in 1995, a crate was opened.
When the wolves appear, a life and death drama unfolds.
And what stepped out didn't just change the animals, it changed the land itself. Park that looked alive. To anyone visiting Yellowstone between 1926 and the late 20th century, the view was breathtaking. Valleys rippled with golden grasses, herds of elk grazed against snow-dusted peaks, and the rivers meandered gently beneath wide skies. It looked like nature at its most untouched, but beneath that postcard-perfect surface, something vital had gone missing. What seemed like abundance was actually an imbalance. The elk, unchecked by predators, had become sedentary and overpopulated. They grazed the same valleys endlessly, devouring willow, aspen, and cottonwood saplings before they could ever become trees. It created what ecologists would later call a green desert, lush with grass but empty of diversity. The consequences were subtle but devastating. Beavers, once common in the region, vanished as their willow-building materials disappeared. Songbirds lost nesting grounds. Riverbanks, no longer held together by root systems, began to erode. Still, most visitors and even many rangers didn't notice. The grass was tall, the elk were plentiful, and the silence, once filled with the howl of wolves, was interpreted as peace. It was an ecosystem suspended in a beautiful kind of failure. Everything looked fine. But year after year, the land was hollowing out from the edges inward, and no one yet understood what was missing, or how deeply it mattered. Blueprint for an erased predator. In the early 1900s, predators weren't seen as part of the balance. They were labeled enemies. The United States government, through the Bureau of Biological Survey, launched an all-out war to sanitize national parks. Their mission was clear: protect game animals like elk and deer by eliminating everything that hunted them. Wolves were the first target. They were trapped, poisoned, shot from horseback, and later, even hunted by plane. The policy wasn't hidden. It was proudly executed. Between 1914 and 1926, Yellowstone's wolves were systematically exterminated. The last known pack was killed in 1926, marking the end of a top predator's reign that had lasted millennia. This was not an act of ignorance, it was calculated. Government reports from the time detailed kill counts with bureaucratic precision. And when the job was done, Yellowstone was declared safer, cleaner, more manageable. But the science of ecology hadn't yet matured. No one considered what might happen when you removed a species that shaped everything beneath it. What followed wasn't immediate collapse. It was slower, quieter, a long decay disguised as order. With no wolves to keep them moving, the elk stayed in the same places year-round, grazing them into exhaustion. What began as management became neglect, and Yellowstone began to forget how to breathe. When balance broke down, the wolves were gone, but the story didn't end. It began to unravel. In the decades that followed their extermination, Yellowstone's elk population surged to nearly 19,000. Without a predator to push them, they moved less, rested more, and lingered in the most vulnerable places: riverbanks, valley floors, young groves. They grazed without fear or pause, and the land responded by falling silent. The willows and aspens along the rivers couldn't survive the relentless browsing. Saplings were stripped bare, regeneration halted. Without those trees, riverbanks lost their anchors. Soil began to collapse into the water. Streams became wide, flat, and muddy. What once teemed with fish and insects turned slow and shallow. The collapse didn't stop there. Beavers, whose dams once shaped entire valleys, vanished. They depend on willows, not just for food, but for engineering. By the early 1990s, a park that once hosted dozens of beaver colonies was down to a single struggling group. Scavengers too suffered. Without wolves to make kills year-round, the only reliable carcasses came in winter, when elk died from cold and hunger. Outside of that season, eagles, ravens, and even bears faced lean months. It was a feast and famine rhythm that starved species adapted to consistency. This was Yellowstone without its architect. A system still standing, but barely. The collapse wasn't a dramatic crash. It was erosion of diversity, of resilience, of memory. And it would take a ghost from the past to remind the park how to live again. A cage in the snow. In January 1995, under the weight of decades of ecological hindsight, a convoy of military planes landed with cargo unlike any the park had seen in generations. Wolves. 14 of them, captured from the wilds of Alberta, each transported in a steel crate. The mission was restoration. But no one knew what would happen next. The wolves were placed in acclimation pens tucked deep within the Lamar Valley. These weren't cages of punishment, they were sanctuaries of hesitation. For weeks, the animals howled beneath the snow-covered mountains, adjusting to the scent and rhythm of a place their ancestors once ruled. Biologists hoped the time would forge bonds, anchor them to the new land, and dull the urge to run back north. On paper, March 1995 was supposed to be triumphant, the moment the gates opened and wildness was returned. But the wolves didn't bolt. They lingered. They stared. Some refused to leave. After a century of persecution, even freedom had become suspect. Eventually, biologists had to cut holes in the back fences to coax the wolves into the wild, unseen. Release had become an act of trust, not just in the animals, but in a broken ecosystem's ability to receive them. When the first paw pressed into snow outside the pen, it marked more than a reintroduction. It was a reckoning, a chance to reverse a decision made 70 years earlier and hope the land remembered how to respond. The predator that shapes water. The wolves did not return with thunder. They returned with fear. But it wasn't theirs. It was the elk's. Biologists call it the landscape of fear, a phenomenon where the mere presence of a predator changes how prey behaves. Elk, once bold and unmoving, began to shift. They stopped loitering in open valleys. They avoided the riverbanks where danger might stalk. They moved constantly, and the land, relieved, began to exhale. The changes were subtle at first. Along the bends of the Lamar River, willow and aspen saplings that had been browsed to stubs for decades began to survive. Their roots dug in, held the soil, slowed the erosion. As banks stabilized, the rivers deepened. Their channels grew narrower, faster, colder, better for fish, better for insects, better for everything downstream. Beavers returned. With willows back, they had the building blocks to engineer ponds and wetlands. From one struggling colony, the park saw an explosion in dam building activity. Water tables rose. New ecosystems formed around the slow trickle of beaver-altered streams. The wolves hadn't just brought balance, they had reintroduced construction crews. But the most astonishing confirmation came years later from hundreds of miles above. In 2021, NASA satellite imagery revealed visible landscape-level transformations in Yellowstone, directly linked to wolf-induced vegetation recovery. The effects of the reintroduction weren't just scientific, they were celestial. The wolf had reshaped the land so profoundly, the scars and healing could be seen from space. Predators, it turns out, don't just shape prey, they sculpt rivers, wolves with human stories. As the ecosystem transformed, so too did the wolves themselves, into legends. Some became symbols of the experiment's success, others emblems of its fragility. They weren't just data points, they had names, stories, and followers. Wolf 21 was the alpha of alphas, a towering black male who never lost a fight, but never killed a rival. In a species where dominance is often violent, he was revered for restraint. His leadership stabilized packs and helped pass down a kind of social intelligence few expected in predators. Then there was the 06 female, named for the year of her birth. She hunted elk alone, an extraordinary feat for a species that relies on group tactics. Her independence and cunning made her a celebrity among wolf watchers. But in 2012, she was shot just outside the park boundary by a hunter. Her death sparked international headlines and reignited debate about the invisible lines between wildness and ownership. And there was Wolf 8, the underdog. Smaller than the others, he took over a pack of pups that weren't his own and raised them with patience and care. Scientists still cite him as evidence of the species' deeply emotional and cooperative nature. These wolves were not anonymous figures on a graph. They were characters in a living experiment, and their stories made people care, not just about the animals, but about the system they helped heal. A river writes its name. The wolves didn't just return life to Yellowstone, they revealed how close it had come to losing its identity. Today, the elk population sits between 6,000 and 8,000, less than half of its former peak. But this isn't absence, it's balance. The land no longer suffers under a single unchecked force. Instead, it pulses with interdependence. Elk still roam, but so do beavers, willow stands, trout, and songbirds. Yet, not everyone celebrates the change. Ranchers along the park's edge still lose livestock to wandering wolves. Hunters argue that the elk herds are now too sparse. For many, the reintroduction remains a symbol of federal overreach, of distant policymakers imposing nature's chaos on rural lives. But the truth is more complicated. Yellowstone today is no longer a green desert. It's a living system stitched together by competition, fear, and cooperation. Beavers are building dams, rivers run clearer, and every spring, new willow shoots appear where none had for decades. And far above it all, satellites continue to track the wolves' legacy. Visible changes in vegetation and river structure, carved not by machines or policy, but by the consequences of a howl in the dark. In Yellowstone, the rivers now remember what balance feels like. They called it an experiment, but it became a revelation. Yellowstone didn't just recover, it remembered. If stories like this move you, share them. Subscribe for more untold recoveries and vanishing truths. And next time you see silence in nature, ask, what's missing that once made it sing?